Welcome to the Extra Buttery Podcast. Today is our 30th episode. 30th! I can't believe we're here yet. And I think we average around maybe 5 listens per episode. So, hey, we're well over the century mark. I'm in Vancouver. My name is Jason Chen, and I'm joined by my gracious co-host, Robert Snow in Toronto.
Yes.
How's it going, Rob?
It's going all right. I mean,
are things okay over there? We just had a little incident.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how closely the folks in the audience have been staying on top of Toronto news, but there was a pretty terrifying thing that happened here in Toronto yesterday. The day we're recording this, the guy plowed into a bunch of pedestrians in a rented van up in the north end of the city, and 10 people were killed. I think 14 people were injured, and luckily they captured the guy without much further incident not long afterwards. But it's shaken up the city quite a bit.
Our thoughts and prayers obviously go out to all those affected by this terrible incident.
Absolutely, yeah.
For this episode, Rob and I decided to go on this crazy adventure and pick out our top 10 films of the 21st century. This was an unbelievably hard exercise for the both of us, or at least for my sake. I was inspired by this idea by a BBC list that put out the top 100 films of the century, and I thought for an episode, it'd be kind of cool to get a feel for what our top 10 films would be like. I think there will be quite a few differences. Neither Rob nor I have revealed our picks to each other, so you're hearing this for the first time. There should be some debate. There should be some argument. But overall, I think it's going to be a fun exercise. So, Rob, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Oh, do you want to lead us off with your first pick?
Okay, well, my picks are in no particular order. These just are the top 10 films because they are in different genres and slightly different periods. But my first film is Gladiator.
My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the North, general of the Felix Legions, loyal servant to the true emperor, Marcus Aurelius.
Okay, all right.
This is the Ridley Scott film with Russell Crowe playing Maximus as a gladiator who seeks vengeance upon his family. And this is the film that saw Joaquin Phoenix in a breakout role as the villain. And I love this film because of obviously the historical background to it, a time which I find personally very interesting. I think it brought back a whole genre of the historical action adventure epic. I think this is Ridley Scott's finest film, which was released in 2000, in quite some while. And this was peak Russell Crowe. And I've always really enjoyed his performances.
And so do you find it funny that pieces of the Gladiator memorabilia, including at least one of the chariots, made up part of his recent auction to raise some funds for his divorce?
Really? I didn't know that.
It was I simultaneously thought it was hilarious, but also a little bit tasteless that he would advertise it. I think he went with one of the big auction houses like Sotheby's or Christie's, and he had all this very, very nice marketing drawn up with him giving a little cheers to the camera. He had a tumbler of scotch or something, dressed in a tuxedo, and with this very nice cursive writing, they wrote, "Russell Crowe, the art of the divorce."
No way, they didn't really put that on there.
100%, and it wasn't a joke. And actually, John Oliver from Last Week Tonight on HBO, his show actually ended up buying a number of the pieces of memorabilia as part of one of his big show ender segments that he likes to do, and he's actually shipping a lot of it up to one of the last remaining Blockbuster video stores up in Alaska. If you haven't seen that segment on Last Week Tonight, it's actually pretty funny. Anyways, going back to the movie that inspired this memorabilia auction. So what is it about Gladiator that really that you think makes it belong with top 10 of 21st century?
Well, I mean, I should begin saying that top 10 is very subjective, and it's basically top 10 films I like the most. So not all of them will be Academy Award darlings, and not all of them will be at the top of anyone's list. But these are movies that I really enjoyed watching. And Gladiator is one of those awakening movies, you know? One of those movies you see kind of in your adolescence and you're kind of wow, this is so awesome. So in 2000, when this was released, I was 12 years old. And this was one of those films that like just like really spoke to me as a kid. It's about this like true hero who goes through a lot of hardship and goes on this like grand majestic adventure. And back in the day, I remember I was really into like ancient Rome and Greek mythology and all this like European history and medieval stuff. So it really spoke to me. And before that time, I don't think I've ever seen an action adventure at this scale with this kind of violence and kind of like visuals. Because if you remember, like they had to rebuild the Colosseum and everything through computer graphics. And if you watch it today, it still kind of holds up. So I thought at the time it was like the most incredible, like crazy, biggest thing I've ever seen. It was a spectacle.
Yeah. Well, I think I came to Gladiator maybe a couple of years after you did. I think I was like a teenager or something when I think I didn't even watch it all the way through the first time I saw pieces of it.
Full disclosure, I did sneak in because I believe it's a rated R movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, like, but I know that I think it was really one of the movies that kind of reinvigorated the whole sword and sandal genre, because like the Western, the sword and sandal genre had a heyday back in the 50s and 60s, and Ben-Hur, arguably like 10 Commandments, even though that's more like biblical, and then it kind of all built to a head with the infamous Cleopatra. With Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. I think that was 1963, which infamously is one of the biggest movie flops of all time and actually bankrupted the studio that financed it. And then I think for many years, the idea of like a sword and sandal movie was frowned upon in Hollywood. People look back to Cleopatra or maybe more vaguely just in general, they were like, we don't think this genre is worth it. But so for Ridley Scott to come along in 2000 and say, this is something I want to do. I want to do it on this epic scale, spend all this money to recreate Rome, essentially. It leaves an impression.
Yeah, I think it was one of the few big budget blockbuster films that became like really accepted by the Academy, which itself is quite rare. What's your first?
For me, my first pick has got to be Lord of the Rings: Fellowship of the Ring.
In the common tongue, it says, one ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all. And in the darkness, bind them.
I knew that would be on there. The Two Towers was on my short list, but I had to cut it out.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think maybe Lord of the Rings was for me what Gladiator was for you at around that age. Like, I'd read the books, obviously. I was really into the mythology, the lore of it. And it's got to be up there with like the original Star Wars trilogy. It's the movie, it's one of the movies that I've rewatched the most times. I think I've probably rewatched all of those movies like 20 times.
Extended edition?
A mix of both, like extended edition multiple times for sure. But, and it's something that like I share with my brother and sister too. Like the three of us always had a long tradition of watching movies together since we were like really young. And it's still like one of those movies that we can always go back to. A lot of sentimental connection to that one.
The interesting about Fellowship of the Ring to me is that I feel like between those three movies, that's the one that holds up the best over time. Do you find that?
I mean, yeah, people will say what they will about Two Towers being kind of like an interstitial movie, like it's got too many pieces of the others to feel like a movie in its own right, which which people can definitely disagree with. And then Return of the King gets knocks for being really long or for having too many endings, which, fair enough. I feel like the Fellowship of the Ring set up that universe in such a confident way and showed that movies that are based on that kind of epic fantasy or high fantasy can succeed commercially and critically, and the craft that Peter Jackson and his team put into that in order to, the practical effects and shooting on location in New Zealand, there was a lot of love and a lot of innovation that went into making those movies and proving to Hollywood that it could be commercially viable. And I think,
Yes.
the giant juggernaut that is Game of Thrones these days, with their like spending $100 million on a season of television, is a direct descendant of that.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think without Lord of the Rings, we wouldn't have a lot of this medieval fantasy, and Game of Thrones being one of them.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, like, Game of Thrones is interesting too when you talk about like the descendants of Lord of the Rings, because I remember at the time that Fellowship of the Ring came out and the other ones did, fantasy movies were still very much held in a certain light with average moviegoers. Like, you would talk to people and say like, oh, I can't stand Lord of the Rings. I fell asleep reading the book and I fell asleep watching the movie. And people were like, there was a people still hadn't kind of accepted them as a mainstream thing, I think.
Yeah.
And it was still very much a geeky thing. Because, I mean, you're seeing people watching Game of Thrones who are really active fans who, back when Lord of the Rings was coming out, they would have never considered themselves to be fantasy fans.
Yeah.
So I think that the role that this movie played in kind of setting people up for that type of fandom is pretty important. So what's your number 2?
My number 2 is another year 2000 movie, Almost Famous.
I thought we were going to Morocco. There is no Morocco. There's never been a Morocco. There's not even a Penny Lane. I don't even know your real name.
So I'm a big Cameron Crowe fan. I don't think he's a particularly consistent director.
No.
I think he's made some pretty bad films. But Almost Famous was one of those really talky, slow, dramatic movies that really sort of I enjoyed. It was a different kind of film than what I was used to. In a way, it felt like my first indie experience, even though it's not really an indie film.
No, yeah, I can see that though.
But it was about a boy kind of going through growing pains and maturing. I think I really connected with the main character. He was a kind of like it was an autobiographical film in some ways. It was about a kid who's writing an article for Rolling Stone. So it's partly nonfiction. But what kind of blew me away was the performances in this film. And that includes Kate Hudson, who I, to this day, don't think she's done anything remotely close to what she did in Almost Famous.
No, she really hasn't.
It's not a film for everyone because, honestly, there are not very many highs and lows. It's a pretty smooth sailing kind of film throughout. Obviously, there are some moments that are more dramatic than others, but I really enjoyed it. I every line of dialogue I think in that movie was superb and really well written. I really connected with everything.
Yeah, and I remember like again, I don't think I watched that one when it was released, but
yeah, I watched this time many times after it was released, and it grew on me. It really grew on me. For a 12-year-old, he doesn't know anything.
But I remember catching up with it later on. Of course, it was probably on your recommendation, in fact.
Yes.
I watched it and I was like, yeah, okay, I can see why people are liking this. Like I definitely related to the main character there, the kid who's writing the article, and like the way he kind of has the veil pulled off his eyes when he sees the less than authentic or
right.
More like commercially motivated decisions in the music industry, and how it's not just about the music and stuff like that.
So it's another way of saying that this didn't really make your short list, eh?
No, but like, I guess what when I think about Almost Famous now, I'm still sort of sad or disappointed that Crowe's career never really took off after that. I mean, he's had a few attempts, and it seems like his past couple of releases have just been absolute stinkers.
I don't think he ever meant to be mainstream, but I do think, didn't he do Jerry Maguire as well? I think he did. Jerry Maguire was great. It's just that he never really had that one hit that really like made everyone look his way.
Yeah, like he's never really been able to join the likes of like
he's never been considered elite.
Scorsese or Spielberg or like other really marketable directors. Like you kind of have to remind people when you say, "Oh yeah, Cameron Crowe."
What's your number 2?
My number 2 is going to be Children of Men by Alfonso Cuarón.
100 years from now, there won't be one sad fuck to look at any of this. What keeps you going?
You know what it is, Theo? I just don't think about it.
Oh, that was so good. It was really close to making my list as well.
All right, so we're syncing up pretty good. For me, like, and it's been years since I last watched Children of Men, so I really feel like I owe it to myself to rewatch it. This is a 2006 film starring Clive Owen, and he plays a I guess did he start out as a journalist? Is that kind of the background
think
of
so,
his character?
yes.
Yeah. A journalist who finds himself in this sort of near future dystopian landscape where humans have lost the ability to have children. And he kind of ends up caring for this single woman who has been abandoned by her family and is the first woman to become pregnant in a long, long time. And he has to sort of protect her from all of these different factions who want to control her and use her for their own ends. And it can be a very bleak film, but technically, Cuarón has always been he's always been lauded for his work with innovations behind the camera and long shots and cinematography, and it's all on display here. There's this oneer, as they're called, like a long take set in a car going through a forest. It comes under attack from these terrorists, this faction of terrorists, and it's all done in one shot. And it's, to this day, it's still amazing that they pulled it off. They actually got the shot.
Yeah, I think it's one of the first films to really make you pay attention to that one shot thing, eh? Like after Children of Men, it really started to become like something that a lot of directors tried to attempt or replicate.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that obviously some people do really well and other people try it and it doesn't really connect. In making Children of Men and kind of achieving a decent amount of commercial success and a lot of critical success, he really was one of the first Mexican filmmakers in a long time to really force Hollywood to take notice of all of the creativity that was happening in that country and really promote the country. And of course, after that we saw Alejandro Inarritu come through and Guillermo del Toro and the three of them, the three amigos. They've all gone on to dominate the industry in their own ways.
But by the way, this year, or the year was released 2006, right?
Yep.
Yeah, this was the year where the big three all had really good films come out, eh?
Because I guess, that year was, what did Inarritu put out that year?
Babel.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which was like completely overrated, and Children of Men should have gotten its slot in the Best Picture nomination.
Yeah, arguably, yeah.
And Del Toro came out with Pan's Labyrinth.
Right, yeah. So they were all well represented, yeah.
So that was a big year, yeah. It was a big year for all three of them. Number 3, I think, for me, may be a controversial choice. This is another Russell Crowe vehicle. It's A Beautiful Mind.
2635, Prairie Portage, Minnesota. These are latitudes and longitudes. There are at least 10 others. They appear to be routing orders across the border into the U.S.
Extraordinary.
So I've seen a lot of biographical films in my time, and they're all okay. Like including, what was that Stephen Hawking one?
Oh, The Theory of Everything.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of like run-of-the-mill, kind of like, you know how biographical films are. Like there's this guy, he goes through or woman, goes through some trouble, overcomes hardship, and there's some sort of like happy ending, or at least bittersweet. A Beautiful Mind was one of the first autobiographical films that I felt had like another layer of plot and drama to it, and that was his schizophrenia, and I thought they dealt with it really well. And Ron Howard's like really good at kind of like meshing between reality and imagination. He did the same Forrest Gump, but I think like A Beautiful Mind was a perfect vehicle for him. And if you read the book, and I've tried, I'd never finished, it's pretty hard to adapt. So I was really glad that he could come up with all these like side characters like Paul Bettany and Ed Harris and Jennifer Connelly. It was a very well acted and well edited and well produced film. And I enjoyed a lot of it, most of it, 100% of it.
And would you say like the revelation of the schizophrenia is still a bit of a twist nowadays for modern viewers? Like, do you think you saw that coming when you first watched it?
Yeah, when I first watched it, I don't think I really saw it coming, but with subsequent views, like the surprise obviously, kind of wears off. But I thought the line that kind of like sealed it for me is when Russell Crowe says, "Hey, Paul Bettany, you haven't aged one bit."
Oh,
and
yeah.
That was kind of a very perfect in-movie moment, rather than, a lot of films having like a close-up of the actor where he has his like face of realization. He really articulates his realization to the audience. And that I think was a really, really clever part because not a lot of films do it that way.
No, and I think a lot of biopics, the temptation is for the filmmakers to kind of lay out all the facts right from act one and say, like, here's this person, they're brilliant, but they have this mental illness or they have this physical deformity or something, and they kind of lay all the challenges out. But in A Beautiful Mind, they wait a pretty long time before they drop one of the biggest revelations about the character.
And the era it set it in too, like it really makes you believe that Russell Crowe was like hired by the CIA to do some like code breaking and all that stuff. He gives in a super convincing performance. And I think it was also really interesting to see the way they dealt with his schizophrenia, where he kind of goes through this hardship where like he's trying to crack the code and then he finds that he's schizophrenic, and then he has another hardship where he has to overcome, and that's coming to terms with that. So I think he kind of goes through like multiple journeys, and you really, by the end of the movie, get a really good sense of his character, which is like the key to any biographical film, obviously. What's your number 3?
My number 3 was There Will Be Blood.
I see the worst in people, Henry. I don't need to look past seeing them to get all I need.
That's on my list.
Oh, okay, so we can...
This is an incredible movie. Incredible.
We'll condense our things.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, There Will Be Blood. Obviously, like Paul Thomas Anderson, probably... I mean, would you say that it's the best of his career so far?
That's tough. But I will say There Will Be Blood is the only Paul Thomas Anderson film I have on my list.
Yeah, so there's that.
So...
But I think I came to this movie surprisingly late, despite the fact that it has a lot of stuff that I love, like Daniel Day-Lewis, obviously, in the lead performance, a period setting, the oil rush in California and Texas, and I guess it starts in sort of the 1910s. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so, and it kind of moves throughout, and by the end of it, I think it's the 40s or 50s when the movie...
Yeah, it has to be, because his son is like in his 30s by that point. This is one of these great American movies, despite the fact that it only came out, 11 years ago. It was so overlooked. Yeah,
so
but it gets right to the core of like American do-it-yourselfness and build yourself up out of nothing, and
capitalism.
It really drills into I think a lot of what still motivates American life. And yet, the intensity of the performances and the level of the craft that Anderson put into it is it almost befits a movie that nobody would see because of how careful everything is. It's like it's not the kind of thing that you would expect to hit the levels that it did.
Yeah, I think so. I can't believe Anderson didn't win Best Director for this film, by the way.
Yeah, I can't believe he's never won to this point. I mean, he's made so many great things.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. He's going to be like the Roger Deakins of directing.
He could be, yeah. Well, I mean, like Hitchcock Hitchcock never won for his whole career, and Scorsese wasn't until The Departed came out, I think, that he won.
Which I think they kind of gave it to him because they kind of felt sorry for him.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So I feel like
because I don't think The Departed was the best film.
Well, no, not from like Scorsese's catalog either. But
yeah,
but yeah, it feels like for some reason Anderson is kind of in that camp all of a sudden.
My number 4 film is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm going to make them alive. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
I remember that speech really well.
So I thought about this one too.
I love this film. First of all, it's Jim Carrey in a dramatic role, and he's excellent in drama. I don't care what anyone says.
Oh yeah.
Kate Winslet is in this, and she's quite good. But I think the driving force is Jim Carrey and the director Michel Gondry. So it's about this man who breaks up with his girlfriend, and he's in so much pain that he kind of hires the services of this agency who can erase memories from your mind. And as they're erasing his memories of his ex-girlfriend, he starts to realize that he prefers to keep the memories even though he's hurting a lot inside. He realizes that the value of these memories is helped shape who he is. And this was one of those films that, like, it's not really drama. It's kind of like a fantasy element thrown in there. Sci-fi element thrown in there.
Oh yeah,
because memory erasing thing, but the editing and the way they do it and the way they show how they're erasing his memories is awesome. It is so creative and intelligent, and I love the story too, and the performances, like I said, were amazing.
You know, when you're talking about something as hard to describe or hard to visualize as memory and feelings and the act of like deleting memories, I mean, you can go in a very matter of fact type of way and just show flashbacks of what's being deleted, but Gondry decides to like, you know, make these dreamscapes where they're like in a bed on a beach, or they're being pulled apart across this like dark field of ice and trying to like grasp for each other, but they just get pulled away by some sort of unseen force. And it's very evocative of like the real dreams that people have, you know, that can't really be properly explained. And and meanwhile, like the cinematography, the hits of color, you know, the choice to have Kate Winslet have like blue and orange in her hair, and you know, it just burns itself into your head.
Yeah, it's funny because as I was thinking about this movie, I kept thinking about the blue hair she had. And another film that was on my short list but didn't make it was Blue is the Warmest Color. And the girl in that, Léa Seydoux, also has blue hair. And it's a romantic drama as well about like pain and love and everything. And I thought it was just really interesting that a lot of films that I've seen that really spoke to me about, you know, how love hurts and blah, 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 and all that sappy stuff, has a female character where she has dyed her hair in like a really eye-catching color, be it blue or red. And I thought that was super interesting. But anyway, I digress.
So for my fourth pick, I'm going with The Dark Knight.
See, madness, as you know, is like gravity. All it takes is a little push.
I had a tough time with this one. No, it didn't make my short list either. But go ahead. Tell me why you loved it.
I think for me, you know, this isn't going to be like a super original take, but, you know, it is one of those movies that really kind of set us down the path that we are today. It legitimized superhero movies in a way that its predecessor, Batman Begins, definitely went a long way towards. But the Dark Knight just said to people, no, like this stuff may be based in a pulpy comic book medium, but it can be serious. It can be dramatic. It can have more real world implications than you would typically expect from the genre. When you were picking these films, did the cultural impact of the film have like a big say in making the list? I definitely thought about it in that way, because I'm also thinking about like, you know, movies that had a huge impact on me, but also, you know, where they kind of stand in the 21st century as far as we are in the 21st century. You know, of course, The Dark Knight is one of the biggest movies from this this century so far in terms of how much money it's made, how much cultural impact it has. You know, people are always quoting it. I mean, you know, you talk about the performance by Heath Ledger as the Joker and the way in which he buries himself into that character and arguably didn't really come out of it before he died. But you're sort of conflicted about it though. Yes, I am. I'm super conflicted about this one actually. And the reason is because I think as much as I enjoyed the film, I think at the end of the day, I enjoyed watching the film because it's Batman and for Heath Ledger's performance, and not necessarily for the story or the action or the cinematography or anything else. I think the only reason I'd ever want to watch it is for Heath Ledger's performance. I could fast forward through everything else, to be honest, and still be okay with it. And I think that's why at the end of the day, I was like, I can't have this film on my list if I'm willing to skip a lot of it. Okay, so number 5 for me is, this might be surprising to some people, but The Wrestler.
I'm an old broken down piece of meat. And I'm alone. And I deserve to be all alone. I just don't want you to hate me.
This was Darren Aronofsky's movie about Mickey Rourke, who is a over-the-hill wrestler who has a ton of personal problems. He's divorced. He's got a daughter he doesn't talk to. He's on drugs all the time. He lives in a trailer. And it's about this guy who refuses to let go of his past. and he begins a relationship with a stripper who's played by Marissa Tomei. And it's interesting because Mickey Rourke was like this huge sex symbol back in the 80s and 90s, eh?
Oh, yeah.
And then he disappeared for a while, tried to become like a pro boxer of some kind. And in this film, he is completely unrecognizable. Like we went through this like routine where he like actually like became like the size of a wrestler. But there's this like so much internal pain that you almost feel like is semi-biographical, based on reality. Yeah. And I love the performances and I love the story. It was one of those few films that really kind of made me tear up a little bit because I was so sympathetic towards the main character.
Oh, wow. They broke through the shell.
Yeah, and this was one of those Darren Aronofsky films where like at no point did I feel disgusted. Because he has a tendency to really push those boundaries sometimes.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah, and so this was a film that I thought was just worked on every single level.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to admit that I have not yet seen it, and
go see it.
It's one of the few Aronofsky films that I haven't seen yet. But
I think this is one of his most underrated works because he's not trying to like be pretentious or like trying to prove a point or anything. He's just showing like the life of a guy who's over there.
Yeah, and it's
so touching. It's super touching.
Yeah, it's definitely on my list. But for my number 5 pick, I'm going with I'm fast forwarding us to 2012 with The Act of Killing.
Oh wow,
a documentary.
Every single one of them was boastfully recounting the grisly details of the killing. And when the survivors and the human rights community in Indonesia saw that, they said, "You're onto something terribly important. Keep filming the perpetrators."
If we're throwing documentaries into this, I wasn't prepared. I might have to change my list now.
Well, I felt like the genre had to be represented in some way. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to fit one in, but
okay.
For me, this was a documentary that I saw. The movie came out in 2012, but I don't think it was available on Netflix for maybe 3 years after that. This was a documentary that far and away, I came out of it feeling incredibly angry, but incredibly impressed by what the filmmaker was able to capture, because he talks to these men who were direct participants in the ethnic cleansing that happened there. I think it was a couple of decades ago now. And these are guys who are still, to this day, local heroes in Indonesia. They're able to drive around in convertibles and show off their wealth. They're able to go on local news television this year and brag about how many people they killed, and they suffer no repercussions. And Oppenheimer, the director, he gets these guys to reenact their murders on camera, which they very willingly do. They mime out how they used to choke people with garrote wires and what they used to do with the bodies, and then he works in all of these really visually weird reenactments with like dancers, and he gets some of the perpetrators to dress up in like women's clothes and kind of like do this interpretive dance stuff, but it's all very strange and evocative, and you're like, he could have gone in many different directions with this story, but he chose to really think about the visual side as well. And in spite of how much rage it inspires in the viewer when you think about the injustice that hasn't been, the injustice that's still there in that country.
I, full disclosure, have not seen this documentary, but I've always been, looking forward to watching this whenever it's available. But if I had to submit one documentary in my top 10, it's Senna.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we've talked about this.
Yeah, which is, I think, mid-2000s, and it's Asif Kapadia, I think. And it's about the Brazilian F1 racer Ayrton Senna, who obviously tragically died in a car crash. But yeah, that would have been my pick. Since I've already told you that There Will Be Blood is on my list already, what's your number 6?
Oh, okay, so I will go with 12 Years a Slave.
My soul arise in heaven, Lord, for the year when Jordan rose.
Oh, this one nearly missed the cut, too.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, for me, 12 Years a Slave, like, setting aside, we've already talked about how, like, cultural impact is kind of factored into some of my picks here.
Yes.
Because this was an important movie in terms of the director, Steve McQueen, being, I think he was the first Black Best Director winner. And, you know, he's telling a story that about a free Black man played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, who was a free man living in, I think it was New York State, and gainfully employed and was well-liked in his community, and was actually abducted into slavery by a couple of random guys who saw him playing his violin in a public park. And they took him down to the South, and he became a slave for, as the title suggests, 12 years, and finally was able to get free of it and reunite with his family, who were never offered an explanation for where he had been that whole time, because naturally the people who took him didn't see him as a person. And it's the way McQueen, who had come from a background as like a video artist and a guy who made works for art galleries, he kind of comes into a story that, based on a true story type of work, and injects his very specific sense of visuals into it, and works with the time scale in the movie, and does fascinating things with the soundtrack and the sound editing to really give you a spread out sense of just how much time is going past for this character, and how it weighs on him, and how it kind of turns him into somebody that he really wasn't before.
I would say the only reason this movie didn't make my top 10 list is because I find very little rewatch value in this film, just based on the subject.
Yeah, it's hard to watch. Yeah,
just based on the subject matter alone. I'm glad I watched it. It's an incredible film. Unfortunately, subjectively, it just doesn't make my top 10. Number 7. This is going to be familiar to listeners of this podcast and Robert Snow, because I talk about this film nonstop. My number 7 film is The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Can't believe I'm sitting with none other than Jesse James. Many's the night I stayed up, my eyes open, my mouth open, just reading about your escapades.
They're all lies,
It is interesting the many ways you and I overlap. You're the youngest of 3 James boys, and I'm the youngest of 5 Ford boys. You have blue eyes, I have blue eyes. You're 5 feet 8 inches tall, I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall. I honestly believe I'm destined for great things, Mr. James.
Oh, yes, I knew this was going to make an appearance.
Yeah, so this is the slow burn cowboy western based on Jesse James. Even though he's not the main character, he's played by Brad Pitt, but the main character is Casey Affleck, who I would argue that this film is his big coming out party as like a legitimate elite actor in Hollywood, setting aside all his stupid off-camera bullshit. I really love the film. The cinematography is great. The story is fascinating. It's one of those films like you have to be in the right mood for, and you have to like subject yourself to it, because it's got a really long runtime. But once you really get into it, once you sit down and enjoy it, I find it incredibly engrossing. I think I could watch this movie nonstop all the time.
Yeah, and I remember you like talking it up for years and years, and I was thinking to myself, how could this?
You're skeptical.
I was skeptical because I'd seen a trailer for it, and I think I'd already seen another later movie by the director Andrew Dominic, and I wasn't
that good.
Yeah, it was called Killing Them Softly, and I really wasn't that jazzed about it. And
we went to see that together.
Did we? Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I remember you were familiar with him, and so I think you ended up liking that movie a little bit more than I did. But yeah, it was. Then I think it finally came to Netflix like last year or the year before. Netflix Canada, and I was like, all right, I got to see this thing. And I did, and I was pretty blown away by it. I mean, I don't think I could.
Really? You were blown away?
Yeah. I was like, I could totally see what you saw in it for the most part, but I still like, as enjoyable as it was and as technically impressive as it was, I don't think it had enough of a connection with me for me to put it on my list. But yeah, 100%. I think
that's what most people felt. Like it didn't really connect with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Which is why it never sold well. Your turn. Number 7.
All right. For me, that's going to be Boyhood from 2014.
I mean, it's not that I'm that happy. What do you expect?
You know what I'm realizing? My life is just gonna go like that. This series of milestones. Getting married, having kids, getting divorced. The time that we thought you were dyslexic. When I taught you how to ride a bike.
Ah, I knew it. I knew this was going to make it. I'm going to have to disagree with you on this one, but go ahead. Why do you like it?
All right. So for me, Boyhood, I mean, talk about a movie that uses one of the most fascinating special effects available to anyone, which is time itself, and uses it to the fullest extent that it can. Literally showing an actor growing up from the age of like 5 or 6 years old all the way up till he's leaving for college. And a filmmaker who decides, this is Richard Linklater we're talking about, who decides that he's going to wait until he has all the footage he needs, slowly piecing it together year over year until he has everything to make this movie work. The story itself and the plot are not super special, and by any means, there's no crazy challenge to overcome or any kind of genre stuff. It's literally just people growing up, getting older, learning lessons, trying to make the lives of other people around them better. And yeah, I found it really, really touched a chord with me, and I will sing its praises forever.
I definitely give it props for its technical expertise and how hard it was. And I know Rob likes his coming of age films about precocious kids. So
this is true. Maybe it's because I like to think I was one.
Well, maybe you were. I don't know. We'll have to ask Mrs. Snow when she comes on the show one day.
Yeah, she has bugged me to come on the show, actually.
Oh, well, what are we waiting for? Mrs. Snow, you're more than welcome. Believe me, it's not me or you, it's Robert. On to number 8. You're gonna like this one. It's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
We're not so very different, you and I. We've both spent our lives looking for the weaknesses in one another's systems. Don't you think it's time to recognize there is as little worth on your side as there is on mine?
Now I'm kind of jealous.
Really? Why?
Yeah. Well, because I love that movie and I didn't even consider it.
Oh, well, would it make your top 10?
Yeah, it might actually bump out one that's going to make you hate me a bit, but
that you haven't revealed?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'll wait for it then. But Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is a slow burn, dramatic spy thriller movie starring Gary Oldman, who should have won Best Actor that year, but he didn't, and features like I think it's safe to say this is an ensemble cast movie, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's got a pretty big cast. They all have a lot of like equally weighted parts.
Right. And so anyway, it's about based on a book, and it's about George Smiley, who's played by Oldman, and he's trying to solve this mystery where I think an agent gets killed and the whole operation goes wrong. And everything about it, what I love is that it's so carefully directed, so carefully plotted. Like every scene in the film tells you something. It didn't really strike me as like a great film the first time I saw it, because honestly, like the plot can be confusing.
Oh yeah.
If you miss certain lines of dialogue. But the more I watch it, the more I'm like, man, this is like one of the best spy thrillers ever. It is so good.
Yeah, well, I mean, the background of this one is that it's based on the first novel in the so-called Carla trilogy by John le Carré.
Yes.
And some people will actually credit le Carré for kind of inventing or at least documenting, because he actually worked in the Secret Services for the UK earlier in his career.
He was Tom Clancy before Tom Clancy.
Yeah, basically. But le Carré has sort of documented in these books a lot of the what we call tradecraft nowadays, a lot of the techniques and the little subtle things that agents will do in the field to get intelligence or to oppose their enemies and all these things. Like it has the bones of that of the real techniques in there.
Okay, so number 9. This might come out of the blue a bit, but I had to think really hard on this one, and I kind of had to rewatch certain clips on YouTube. But it's Silver Linings Playbook.
Not that I give a fuck about football or about your superstitions, but if it's me reading the signs, I don't send the Eagles guy, whose personal motto is Excelsior, to a fucking Giants game, especially when he's already in a legal situation.
Unbelievable. Wow. This is unbelievable. How did you know all that stuff?
I did my research.
Oh, wow. Okay, I did not expect that one.
Yeah, so this is a David O. Russell film about 2 really flawed and hilarious characters played by Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence. I love this film because it dealt with mental illness in a very funny way. And I don't think many films did that. And it was a very good, if you strip away everything else, it was a very good romantic comedy. I think the chemistry was great. I think it has tons of rewatchability. I think the screenwriting and the lines are perfect. I think Jennifer Lawrence's performance is probably one of the best, if not the best in her career, because I think it's a very difficult role to play. I think in the original production, Anne Hathaway was supposed to play the main character. I mean, it would have been a totally different film. I think it gets overlooked because of the genre it's in, and because Jennifer Lawrence has obviously done a lot of other things, and so has Bradley Cooper. But I think this is two actors at the top of their game playing roles that people don't expect them to play, and I think they pulled it off fantastically.
Yeah.
My only gripe with this film is Robert De Niro's character. To me, he's still like this really like brooding, tough gangster type, and he doesn't really play that in this role or in this film. So that kind of threw me off. But overall, I loved it. I would watch this film any day.
All right. Yeah, I don't. I can't say it made a huge impact on me when I first saw it, but yeah, I can see the value in it. So weirdly, I think maybe you were on number 9, but now I'm on my 8th one.
Probably skipped you.
I don't know. So for me, my next one is Mad Max Fury Road.
We go back?
Back?
Yeah.
I thought you weren't insane anymore.
What are they saying?
He wants to go back from where they came.
Citadel.
What's there to find at the Citadel?
Green.
Oh, that's on my list. That would be my 10th. So there's my 10.
Okay, so
we'll go over them in the end.
Okay,
but yeah, Mad Max.
So I mean, obviously this only came out 3 years ago, but it is still just a gigantic movie for me. Like, it inspired me to rewatch or to watch for the first time, the entirety of the series by George Miller. Kind of immersed myself in the world. I ended up getting really into one of the video games that came out connected to the release, which was actually really good. It doesn't document any stuff from the movies. It's kind of its own thing, but it's a lot of fun.
I've heard that,
and I got so into Mad Max fandom with this, and
it is so good though.
Yeah, and this one is like, it is George Miller really delivering on everything that this series promised in the earlier installments, because now he has the combination of all of his practical experience, kind of cobbling these movies together out of nothing, which he really had to do in a couple of the earlier ones, and then bringing to bear like a full bore Hollywood budget to take care of all the rest of it, and seamlessly blending CGI and practical effects, and giving you this like nonstop chase of a film that you never get tired of watching. I mean, I just can't say enough good things about it.
I 100% totally agree with you. Even though it's number 10 on my list, it's definitely not in last place, but it's a truly fantastic action film. Like, all these Die Hard people can just like screw off, because this blows Die Hard out of the water.
Oh yeah.
This is the best action film I've ever seen. And I have no problem saying that. I know everyone's taste is a little different, but the world building, the action, the characters, I thought all of it was excellent. And it can be, I think, draining to watch it because everything happens so fast and there's so much going on. But I almost feel like that's what an action film should be. And once you start watching it, it's like a 2-hour roller coaster.
Yeah. And for all the people who kind of, they hear the words action movie and they kind of think to themselves, oh, it's just a movie for boys. And
no, it's not.
This bucks that norm pretty hard. It features Charlize Theron front and center. She's arguably the lead, if not the main character of the movie, despite the fact that the Max of the title is still there.
Who says like no lines?
Yeah, Tom Hardy as Max. He's doing he has typical weird stuff with his vocal performance, but no, this is really Charlize Theron's movie, and it's a movie that is able to say something about feminine equality or feminism without feeling like it's hitting you over the head with some sort of message. It stands up for the female characters in the universe of the movie without making them into like harpies or without belaboring the point. And that's something that's very hard for movies to do in general, let alone in a genre that, traditionally pushes women far to the side, if it ever depicts them at all.
100% agree with everything you said. What are your other films? The rest of your top 10?
So yeah, because we've we've agreed on a couple of our picks, and we're sort of out of sync here. But you called on Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, so that was the one that I think I would have also added to the list, and I might have bumped Moonlight in favor of that.
Hey, let your head rest in my hand. Relax. I got you. I promise. I'm not gonna let you go. Hey man, I got you. There you go. 10 seconds. That right there, you're in the middle of the world, man.
Because I know you love Moonlight, but
I do. That's if there was a number 11, Moonlight would be number 11.
All right, I thought so. And for me, even though a movie that came out this year, Call Me by Your Name, I felt like I identified with the cinematography and the musical choices and everything in that film a little bit more than I did in Moonlight. I can't ignore what Barry Jenkins kind of brings to the table with this one. He's doing such innovative stuff with depicting a man's life over the course of 3 very different periods of his life, choosing 3 different actors to portray those different sections, doing some very interesting stuff with combining, very different genres of music on the soundtrack, like classical music that bleeds into hip hop, making a movie for such a limited budget, I think in the span of 18 days.
Yeah, I think this was kind of also Mahershala Ali's coming out party. He has a bit role. He's not the main character, but he has a pretty important role in the film. He knocks it out of the park. Janelle Monáe, she's really good. Everyone was really good in this film. But what really struck me about this film is that a lot of times you talk about feeling things when you watch film. This film really made me feel things. Not just emotions, but there are certain shots of, say, his face in the water and you got droplets coming down his face. You've got the camera in the ocean when he's learning how to swim. You've got rags on clotheslines just blowing in the air. You got sand at the beach. And it really just felt so real. And the texture was so in your face and so hard to ignore. I don't know if I've ever seen a film quite like it.
So you're saying they can throw out the whole 4DX thing, that $30 tickets where they spray water in your face.
that stuff is stupid. Even the D-Box stuff I think is really dumb.
Oh yeah, it's all in the same category for me.
Yeah, exactly. And so this was the movie where I watched it in the theater not knowing what to expect. And then I sat in the seat for freaking 5 minutes after the credits finished rolling because I was blown away at just how good it was. And I remember sitting there that day and I was like, this is going to win Best Picture. And I'm glad it did.
So for the final one here, my number 10, I have to rep my man, Guillermo, and select Shape of Water.
When he looks at me, the way he looks at me, he does not know what I lack or how I am incomplete.
I knew it.
It got some heat when it won Best Picture for being, weird or for being too Hollywoody or, it got and I can see all those criticisms. I can understand them. But this is a movie that should not have been nearly as successful as it was. It should not have been able to synthesize all these weird little bits of monster movies and romance and period flicks, and yet it does. And and setting aside the potential ick factor that some people might experience from what could be called a bestiality type of subplot. A woman falls in love with a fish man and is depicted having sex with him on screen. That might have been a total deal breaker for audiences a long time ago, but that's a movie that can happen now. And not only that, Del Toro is able to use that potentially weird, potentially deal breaking interaction to talk about stuff in real life. He's able to use it, to talk about people who have, suffer from disabilities, or people who different sexual orientations, anybody who's struggling in society to kind of fit in. He's able to take this weirdly fantastical thing and apply it. And it's really, really cool.
Yep. So just to recap, my top 10 in order of release date is Gladiator, Almost Famous, A Beautiful Mind, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, There Will Be Blood, The Wrestler, The Assassination of Jesse James, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, Silver Linings Playbook, and Mad Max Fury Road.
All right. And for me, also in order of release, we've got Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Children of Men, There Will Be Blood, The Dark Knight, The Act of Killing, 12 Years a Slave, Boyhood, Mad Max Fury Road, Moonlight, and The Shape of Water. I
do need to mention three films that I had a lot of trouble cutting. The first was Toy Story 3, and I kind of wanted to rep a animated movie, but I mean, I love this and Inside Out, and I couldn't really decide. And at the end of the day, I mean, I don't think animation is what I tend to gravitate towards. So even though I really, really enjoy the films, I still prefer human actors and real drama and whatnot. The other two films were another Russell Crowe vehicle, Master and Commander, which I think is a very, very underrated film from Peter Berg.
That's up there for me as well.
Yeah, and the third one was actually Casino Royale.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it's another action movie that kind of reinvented a certain genre, and I do have certain complaints about the film, but overall, I think it was completely well done. I could watch that movie over and over again for ages, too. The other thing I would kind of notice while I was doing this is that a lot of my films tend to be like mid-2000s and forward, or even past that. So from 2000 to 2000, I'd say 8 is where most of my films fall in.
Oh, yeah.
And so maybe I'm just being like a curmudgeon, but remember how I keep saying like, oh, we haven't had a good year in ages.
Yeah.
So I kind of went back, and I feel like 2003 and 2006 were really strong years. But from like 2013 to 2017, I had maybe like 10 films combined from all those years. Whereas in other years, I've had like 5 to 8 on the short list. So I don't know if that says something about me or just the quality of film in general. But it seems like a lot of the films I like tend to be more from the early 2000s.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everyone's got a couple of decades that really speak to them. I mean, I was a little bit daunted when I first went back on Letterboxd to kind of begin this process, because it told me that I'd seen 360 movies in the 2000s. And then I'd seen 630 movies in the 2010s.
Okay, so that kind of tells you like what kind of era that you belong to in terms of watching a.
Yeah, because it's you go to your general films page on Letterboxd. Again, shameless plug for this fantastic site. If you're a film lover and you're not on it, what are you doing with your life?
This isn't complete, but it's, I think, fairly accurate of the trend. I've watched 540 films released in the 2000s, but in the 2010s, I've watched only 300.
Oh, yeah. So there it's almost totally flipped.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Depending on how you define the whole best of the 21st century thing, like I didn't mention any Wes Anderson in here.
Yeah, that's surprising.
That's killing me. Like,
what the hell?
I think maybe if called upon, I could very easily swap out like 12 Years a Slave for Grand Budapest Hotel or Moonrise Kingdom. So bear that in mind. I also would go to bat for Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, because I'm one of the few people who really adores that movie. And absolutely, if anybody out there thinks that we're crazy about any of these picks, you have to come and yell at us on Twitter. Because
okay.
That's the way people work through their feelings nowadays. Thanks for joining us on this epic journey through the movies of the 21st century.
On this fun exercise.
Yeah, and, definitely take some inspiration from us and choose your own short list and join the conversation.
Tell us about it. But anyway, thank you for listening. Be sure to check out our website, www.kinetoscope.ca. My name is Jason Chen from Vancouver.
And I'm Robert Snow in Toronto. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.